Welcome to The Beat. I'm Jason Johnson and for Ari Melber. It is a very busy Friday. I'll speak to a former CDC expert who resigned over RFK Jr. and a former Army secretary condemning Trump's abuse of power. But first, major losses for Trump's aggressive immigration agenda. Columbia graduate Mahmoud Khalil will be released on bail, a victory for foreign-born students targeted by the Trump administration. Khalil is the, quote, only high-profile pro-Palestinian demonstrator in the United States who remains in confinement. The judge siding with Khalil that his detention was, quote, unlawful retaliation against his pro-Palestinian speech. And a victory for higher education. A judge blocking the Trump administration from halting Harvard's enrollment of international students, directing Trump to restore their visas. But Trump's authoritarian goals did move forward thanks to some court rulings. An appeals court siding with Trump, blocking California Governor Gavin Newsom's effort to reclaim control of the National Guard in Los Angeles, indefinitely setting aside a lower court ruling that called Trump's moves illegal. That same judge holding a brief hearing today, putting off any additional rulings for now, but instead made clear he believes he maintains jurisdiction to rule whether troops are violating an act prohibiting them from conducting civilian law enforcement, asking both parties to weigh in by Monday. Meanwhile, the Trump administration doubling down on deportations and kidnappings. This scene captured by a bystander outside a Home Depot in Los Angeles of armed ICE agents detaining workers. And agents spotted outside of Dodger Stadium. Team officials saying they barred them from entering, although DHS claims their presence was, quote, unrelated to any operation or enforcement. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, confirming ICE raids will continue on farms, job sites, and hotels, but still prioritizing criminals.
We continue operations on farms and hotels. However, we do it in a prioritized manner. When it comes to hotels and worksite enforcement operations, we prioritize them and put the criminal operations first. So they're not off the table, especially when it comes to a criminal investigation.
So just so we're clear, this is contrary to what Trump promised just last week, that changes were coming to raids on those industries, which the American Farm Bureau Federation warned could disrupt the food supply chain in the United States. But this is affecting all industries. Bloomberg reporting, quote, employees terrified of ICE raids are failing to show up at work across the United States. Joining me now to discuss is Juanita Tolliver, MSNBC political analyst, and Emily Bazelon, staff writer at the New York Times. Emily, we will start with you because you are not here in Washington, D.C. I want to start with this because I actually think this is super important. Courts have just ruled Trump can no longer get away with blocking international students getting into Harvard. Not only is this, of course, a good ruling, but what does this do sort of strategically to the Trump administration's sort of never-ending effort to lock down, abuse, or take control of higher education in America?
Well, I think it's really important for Harvard because there are so many international students who attend, and they're an important source of revenue for the school. And so what the judge is saying here is that Trump can't retaliate against Harvard in this blanket way by just abruptly canceling its access to the student visa program. It has to go through some sort of review process. And, the setbacks that Trump has been having in court with regard to Harvard are not just this case. This has been also a loser for the Trump administration in terms of blocking funds to Harvard. So I think that is all helpful to the school, obviously, which has been trying to stand up to the administration. There also seem to be negotiations going on behind the scenes between the government and Harvard, and it will be interesting to see how this ruling affects those developments. Is the school going to be able to reach some kind of deal that does not jeopardize its academic freedom and integrity, but gets the Trump administration satisfied enough that these other kinds of investigations and serious threats continue to be addressed?
Juanita, I'm going to make this more specific. In many respects, the Trump administration is hostile against higher education because they know that that will be the groundswell of people resisting their authoritarian regime. That's the basics. And what they've asked Harvard for is things like, we want all the documentations and all the financial information of anyone who we deem to potentially be a threat or an international student. Let's move away from Harvard for half a second.
Mm.
What does this ruling mean for Georgetown, for Stanford, for the University of Virginia, for Michigan, for Maryland? What does this say to all the other universities in the country who are watching this and on pins and needles as to what they might have to do or what they might face in the coming months?
Don't acquiesce. There are tools available to you. I think Harvard has demonstrated, take the Trump administration to court. It can go in your favor and in the favor of the international students who are seeking higher education in the United States. What's interesting about this case, though, Jason, is that the Trump administration said specifically, oh, we don't have concerns about any of those other colleges.
Right.
So I'm going to be watching how those universities then use that against the Trump administration when they try to flip, because Emily talked about Harvard making a deal that satisfies the administration. I don't believe the administration will ever be satisfied.
Right.
And so tracking everything that they're doing and saying, I think, is in the best interest of every college president who is watching this unfold right now.
So moving ahead with sort of what the impact of this is. I, as a university professor, I'm at Morgan State University,
Yes.
I talk about this all the time. The idea of limiting international students is a huge problem for American students.
Yes, it is.
Because international students are often full pay and the money they pay helps for scholarships and everything else like that. What do you think is the impact of this on international students coming to the United States? Because if they're backing out, it ends up hurting our students here too, right?
Honestly, Jason, I'm not even sure how long or if there will be a cooling effect, but I'm anticipating some of those students who had their visa applications denied
Right.
or revoked to just say, I don't even feel like dealing with it. I'll go to France, I'll go to Germany, I'll go to some other country that also has leading competitive institutions to learn. That is a massive loss for American students, like you said, not just for the cost savings, but also the exposure.
Right.
Every time I travel abroad, I keep thinking how our academic systems can do a lot more to expose students to other cultures, other ways of life, other ways of thinking. And that's going to be a major loss. But I do think international students are going to be taking a hard look at this and say, okay, that's the ruling today. I know all about appeals courts.
Right.
What's it going to be next year when I'm a junior, or next year when I'm starting my PhD, which takes years and years of time, like, as you know, Dr. Jason Johnson.
Emily, following up with this, because this is one of the things that I've seen as one of the long-term dangers. Yes, it's the attack on academic institutions. Yes, it's a financial impact, but it also has an impact on American soft power, right? There are leaders from all over the world who've gotten part of their education in America, right? Financial advisors in France and Germany and Australia and everywhere else like that. You know, it's why you have so many world leaders who speak English well. What could be the impact down the road if there's a cooling effect, if people are concerned about attending higher education in America? 10 years from now, aren't those the people we're going to have to negotiate with when, as a nation, we're talking to leaders in other countries?
Yes, that is a distinct possibility. You know, higher education in the United States has been just a huge asset, public very much as well as private universities. We've attracted lots of people to this country. These schools do, you know, world-class, most advanced research. And so,
Mhm.
especially when you're talking about science as well as political leadership, as you were just mentioning, Jason, there is just a long way to fall here. And it would be a huge own goal for the United States to give up all of that accomplishment and achievement, or even really just to threaten it in any way. Because I think, as you're both doing a really good job explaining, once you undermine people's confidence in the whole system, it is a multi-year process getting an education. And so, you know, there are a lot of dominoes that could fall here.
I want to go with the same idea of this economic fallout. So right here we have a story out of Bloomberg. Employees are terrified of ICE raids. They're failing to show up at work. If a quote here, economic fallout looms. The U.S. workforce shrank in May, partly because of a decline in the number of foreign-born workers. In California, mass deportations could wipe out $275 billion in economic output, slash tax revenue by as much as $23 billion annually, and severely disrupt industries. Emily, we're focused on California, but this is also North Carolina. This is Georgia. This is South Carolina. This is Texas. This is anywhere that has a poultry farm or crops that need to be brought in one way or another. What's the potential long-term economic impact of these deportations with just economies in states that aren't the biggest economies in the world?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this 10 or 12 years ago. Alabama, just the state, passed a very harsh immigration enforcement law, and lots of agricultural and other workers fled the state. And you saw a real decrease in economic output. in Alabama. And so if we have these raids in workplaces and these jobs aren't filled, you're going to see the same kind of impact across the country. I think that is why President Trump has been hearing from industry leaders in the farm and in the factory sectors. And he seems to want to pull back from the kind of workplace enforcement that ICE is doing. But, Tom Homan, his border czar, has a different idea. And so that's why these raids continue. And the question is how many people see what's happening and are chilled. We were just talking about chilling effects of students. This is another kind of impact where if workers see people being snatched up around them, then they're not going to stick around. And there are a lot of crops that wouldn't get picked in that situation.
Juanita, really quickly, I've seen this impact. I've heard people talk about food trucks not being there, services not being available. Who's running this clown car? Because you got Donald Trump saying, well, we're going to change this. And Tom Homan is saying, we're going to step up these raids. Just very quickly, is anyone actually in charge of these raids, or are this just going to continue the way it is?
Honestly, I feel like the ICE agents, the ones doing the administration's bidding, are dictating how this goes. And honestly, Jason, I appreciate us discussing the economic impact, but I also want to remind people these are human beings who have the right to seek asylum, or some of them having their cases dismissed as they go through the approval process to stay in this country legally. And so I think getting back to the humanity of the situation is also a critical part of the conversation.
Humanity has never been something the Trump administration has been good at acknowledging. Juanita Tolliver and Emily Bazelon, thank you so much for starting us off tonight on The Beat. Later in the show, a former top vaccine expert at the CDC just resigned over RFK Jr.'s influence. She has a warning for the country. She'll be with me live. Also tonight, Democrat Brad Lander was back in immigration court today after his ICE arrest. He'll be on The Beat. But first, the former Secretary of the Army is speaking out about Trump's use of troops, and he joins me next. We're back in just 90 seconds. I'm back with former Army Secretary Luis Caldera speaking out about Trump's use of troops. He is one of 8 high-level military officials who filed a legal brief opposing Trump's use of active duty Marines in Los Angeles. They write in part, quote, "The risks of politicalization under these circumstances are profound and not speculative, especially where the president has, in his official capacity, overtly pitted the military against his professed political opponents." It's a warning that Trump has already crossed a red line. This week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth hinted the administration may maintain troops in the streets even if a court ruled it illegal.
If the court says this deployment of troops into our cities is not legal, would you follow that court's order?
It's pending in the courts, Senator.
Well, when the court decides, would you follow that court's order decision?
I don't believe district courts should be determining national security policy.
So
but
you will not be following that.
when it goes to the
it's a
Supreme Court,
legitimate-
we'll see.
This is a dramatic break with long-standing principles espoused by veterans, elected officials from both parties, and presidents.
The president cannot put troops in for law enforcement in the United States.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort.
Active duty troops are trained for warfighting and not policing.
Don't do it with the Army because it's illegal.
The president cannot put troops in for law enforcement in the United States without either declaring the situation an insurrection or being asked to do so by the governor of a particular state.
Former Army Secretary Luis Caldera joins me now. Okay, thank you so much for being with us here tonight on The Beat. I'm going to say this as someone who was recently in Los Angeles, saw these troops being moved in. It was horrifying. It was horrifying. It looks like the kind of thing that we say is not supposed to happen in the United States. So just at a basic level for everybody to understand, why is it a bad idea to have the Army engaged in policing in a domestic American city?
Well, there's a number of reasons that we expressed to the court in an amicus brief. Those of us who are retired senior military and senior defense officials. And the most important one is that the military needs to focus on its core mission, which is being trained and ready to fight and win the nation's wars. When they're used for anything other than training, maintaining their equipment, working with allies, you're degrading their readiness and capabilities. But when you use them, they're not supposed to be used for domestic law enforcement. There are laws against that, the Posse Comitatus Act. When you do that, you run tremendous risks. And so are the risks worth it? And we don't think the risks are worth it. They could end up being either physically attack themselves or in a position where they have to defend themselves. Now they're confronting members of the public. It risks the military being seen as politicized, as favoring one party or favoring the president as opposed to the Constitution and the nation, especially when protesters, those who are not violently, but who are peacefully protesting policies of the president, a right they have under the Constitution. And we're concerned that can undermine support for the military, including its budgets, recruitment, its use, and when we truly do need to deploy our forces to defend our country.
So I'll put this at even sort of a more basic level. The Army is prepared to kill people, right? And that shouldn't be your first response or concern when dealing with protesters, right? Certainly not sort of domestic protesters in the United States, correct?
Right. Well, they're not trained for, to lower tensions in civilian type law enforcement situations. It's very different. I mean, they do have to follow the law and the law of war, which includes dealing with refugees and people who've surrendered and things like that. But they are not trained for civilian law enforcement. And there are other forces, including federal law enforcement, state and city law enforcement, available to do that. Neither the Sheriff's Department, the LAPD, or anyone else said that they were overwhelmed and unable to deal with this with their own civilian forces.
With your experience, not just in this country, but looking at how we've had to view the world, how the United States has had to play a role in the world, if this were happening in an allied country, right? If we saw the Prime Minister of England send the army into Manchester, if we saw, the President of France, if we were to see this happening in an allied nation, what would the concerns of the United States be? Because my thoughts are our allies, our NATO allies are watching this right now. They can't be happy, right?
Well, you don't want to. I mean, one of the concerns is that you can significantly lower the bar to ever deploying military forces once you've done this. So, the president has said, well, we're unable to execute federal law. It's not clear that they tried all the other things they could have tried short of deploying military forces. But once you have military forces there with military equipment, with military weapons, it's a show of force. It's an intimidation of the public. It feels like a militarized country. That's not what we want in our nation.
And it doesn't leave like a good model, right? And when we're talking about sort of democracy and freedom of speech in other places.
Well, there are many things that, unfortunately, this administration has done that are not a great model for support of democracy, for support of human rights, for support of international law and even U.S. domestic law. But yes, it does not send the right message. When we lower our standards, it makes any would-be autocrat, gives them license to lower theirs.
I want to play this sound real quick from Secretary Pete Hegseth and Warren, an exchange on domestic military deployment, and get your thoughts right after that.
How about if the president says he wants to send troops to 15 cities? Would you be willing to do that?
Senator, I don't accept your hypothetical because it's
That's hypothetical.
not a real
That's
one.
the question. You're the Secretary of Defense. Would you send troops to 15 cities if the president said do it? Would you do it? 15 cities.
Again, Senator, it's a complete hypothetical lacking any context
Look,
at all.
You're the Secretary
And I refuse to
of
box
Defense.
myself in based on
Well, you can
questioning on a
refuse, but
hypothetical.
you're here asking for $1 trillion, and I want to know how you're going to spend it.
He's lying, right? I mean, this is not a hypothetical. The president has said that he wants to send troops to multiple cities to fight the invasion, right?
Well, the president has said that, and here's the challenge. If you say one thing like, we're going to put troops around a federal building to protect the federal building, well, you probably could do that with other local police or other federal law enforcement officers. But let's say that you do that to protect that building. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying, I'm going to send troops out to accompany ICE agents as they go on raids on farms or factories or at schools, that's a different thing. Now you're involved. Now you're directly involving the military in enforcement of immigration laws, right? And so I think we don't want to lower the bar for how easily you can deploy troops. It's probably possible that any protest, including the No Kings protests,
Right.
that the president could say, oh, there are some federal laws being violated, and therefore, in order to enforce those laws, I've got to send military troops to those locations. And this is just as President Trump can point to what President Bush did in 1992 in response to the LA riots at the invitation of the governor of California. Some future president is going to be able to point to President Trump's actions and say, in other much less demanding circumstances, I can send troops.
Yeah, unfortunately, at this rate, Trump would send the Army to the wrong team city celebration after a Super Bowl. That seems to be the path that we're heading to. Former Army Secretary Luis Caldera, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Later, I'll talk to Democrat Brad Lander on why he was back at immigration court today despite his arrest by ICE agents. But first, a leading vaccine expert just resigned from the CDC over RFK Jr.'s impact. She has a warning for the country. She's with me next on The Beat. Public backlash growing against our country's top health official, RFK Jr., as more Americans stand up to the Trump administration. One of RFK Jr.'s most controversial moves thus far, firing every single member of a key CDC vaccine advisory committee and replacing them with people who have a history of attacking vaccines and spreading misinformation. Former members of the CDC vaccine board slamming the health official, saying the move, quote, may roll back the achievements of U.S. immunization policy, impact people's access to life-saving vaccines, and ultimately put U.S. families at risk. They're not alone in their warnings. One senior advisor on vaccine policy at the CDC, Dr. Fiona Havers, resigning this week after more than a decade at the agency, saying she can no longer work under RFK Jr. as he dismantles key processes. Dr. Havers telling the New York Times, quote, if it isn't stopped, a lot of Americans are going to die as a result of vaccine-preventable diseases. Dr. Fiona Havers joins me now. Thank you so much, Dr. Havers. I'm very excited about this because I think we hear and we see videos of how RFK Jr. behaves, but you're at the CDC. You've had to have interactions with this person. Just as a manager, just as someone responsible for a government agency, does he just come off as incompetent? Is he just disinterested in the expertise of the people in the building? What is he actually like to work for now that you're finally free?
I'll be completely honest. I have not had any direct interactions with RFK Jr. My role is really to generate the data that informs vaccine policy. And my main role at CDC was overseeing a large hospitalization tracking system that provides a lot of the data and the science so that the CDC could make science-based, evidence-based policy decisions. So I don't interact with him personally, but I certainly have seen the impact that he's had on the agency.
Is that impact purely scientific, meaning replacing people who are actual experts with crackpots and theorists, or is it also philosophical, meaning do you find that people who perhaps have a more holistic view of taking care of public health are being pushed aside in favor of people who want to go after sort of idiosyncratic conspiracies?
But one thing I would say is that the career CDC scientists that are still there really do care about science. And I do think that a lot of the data coming out of CDC is still solid. But what happened this last week when he fired the advisory committee was really him putting in people that are going to take those data and not use them appropriately, no longer do science-based, evidence-based vaccine policy. What happened over the last couple of weeks has basically been that RFK Jr. has blown up vaccine policy for the United States. For me, one of the major other precipitating events was that on May 27th, he went on X and announced that CDC had changed the COVID immunization schedule. CDC was not involved in that. No one who does COVID vaccine policy was involved in that decision. And that is also now not how the CDC immunization schedule is changed. And the reason why this is important, I do want to clarify what's on the CDC immunization schedule matters for insurance coverage. If that has changed, Americans lose access to vaccines. If the people that he's installed on this new committee restrict vaccines and change recommendations so they're no longer recommended by CDC, Americans will no longer have insurance coverage for these life-saving vaccines. And even if they want to get them, they may not have access. That's why this matters.
Dr. Havers, one of the key things that you said in your interviews, you said, look, people are going to die because of these policies. I am someone who's really dedicated to not catastrophizing when I'm behind this desk, but I do want people to understand how serious things are. Let's just play this out heading into flu season this fall. What could be the impact of RFK Jr.'s leadership on the health, the life and death of people in this country once we hit flu season, given his philosophies?
No, I mean, so currently influenza kills thousands of Americans every year, most of them older adults. If, for whatever reason, there is restrictions on recommendations for influenza vaccines, which is much less likely than COVID vaccines, but if that happens, I think, and fewer older adults in particular, or very young children, or pregnant women are not vaccinated, there could be an increase in flu deaths. I mean, I'm a physician. I spent my entire career working on vaccine preventable diseases, but I also see patients. I have the honor of taking care of patients at the Atlanta VA and taking care of our veterans. And so I've seen people die of vaccine preventable deaths. And I think if the CDC immunization schedule is meddled with and it is restricted in any way, fewer people are going to get vaccines. That may be because their insurance no longer covers it, which is a very real consequence of any changes to the CDC immunization schedule. And because there's increased confusion in terms of who should be getting what vaccines. I will say also, like the CDC, clinicians across the country rely on this immunization schedule. And it is also generally, when there changes are made to it, it is endorsed by all the professional societies. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, they all have a voice and weigh in on this very complicated process to make a change to the CDC immunization schedule. And if if this turns into a process where RFK Jr. announces on Twitter that CDC changes the immunization schedule, all of those voices are cut out. The implications, the really nuanced implications of how exactly the CDC immunization schedule is worded is lost. And people who should be getting vaccines are going to lose coverage, lose access. There's going to be increased confusion, and patients and clinicians won't know where to turn for reliable vaccine information.
Dr. Fiona Havers, thank you for laying out how dangerous this is. And I congratulate you for your bravery and stepping up and speaking about the danger that we're facing as a country. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Next, New York City Comptroller Brad Lander joins me live to talk about what he saw in immigration court today. That's next on The Beat. Some Democratic officials are actually fighting back against Trump's hardline immigration tactics. New York City Comptroller and Democratic mayoral candidate Brad Lander is back at federal immigration court today to observe court proceedings. Just days ago, Lander was arrested by ICE agents in immigration court. Lander says he was there to accompany a defendant out of court.
And I the judicial warrant.
You have the warrant. You don't have a warrant.
I'm gonna let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it? I'm in my hand. What's up? I'm in my hand here. Go. Sorry, you hold it. Let's go. I was right. Let's go. The warrant. Let's go. The warrant. Take it back. Put it in the Take it back. Take it back. Take it back. Take it back. You don't have the warrant. You don't have authority to arrest U.S. citizens.
Democratic officials, including New York's Governor Kathy Hochul, condemning his arrest.
How dare they take an elected official who's been going down there for weeks to escort people who are afraid to walk into a courthouse in the United States of America?
Joining me now is Brad Lander, New York City Comptroller and mayoral candidate. Brad, I want to start with this. Your team sent us this video of what you saw outside of federal immigration court today. I want to show this to you, get your thoughts on the other side.
Get off it. Get off it.
Brad, can you just walk us through what we just saw?
Yeah, that was a family separation. There was a couple that was in the courtroom, and actually, my wife and I were both in the courtroom watching. They crossed together in Brownsville, Texas last year, and they've been living in Newark. They both had their cases on today, but the government moved, Department of Homeland Security moved to have him stripped of status, and then they realized it at the table, and she's 8 months pregnant, and she starts sobbing. And the two of them walk out of the room. My wife speaks good Spanish, so she explained to them what was about to happen. And then this set of, mostly not in uniform, masked agents descend on them, pull him out of her arms, and scoop him away and disappear him. And he doesn't have his due process rights. We don't know where he is. He doesn't have a lawyer. And now we have an 8-month pregnant woman who's been separated from her husband for absolutely arbitrary reasons.
I want to start with this because not only did you catch this on tape, but you were also victimized by this kind of violence. You've done this kind of work for years. Have you ever seen ICE this out of control? Have you ever seen this kind of behavior in the past? Did this happen after the Gulf War? Did this happen after 9/11? Or is this entirely new from your perspective?
I mean, I've never seen anything like this. Even just understand you're in a courtroom, and usually if you would be at the end of a court hearing, if the defendant, is going to be incarcerated, the bailiff comes over, someone explains what's happening. The judge says, by what authority? To have these, this gang in the elevator lobby, not wearing uniforms, wearing masks, descend on people in a very aggressive and violent theater. It is both to execute mass deportations and to strike fear, not just into immigrant communities, but into all American communities.
I am glad you said that, because one of the concerns that I've had, whether it was the Ras Baraka in New Jersey or senators in California or yourself, is I feel that part of the long-term plan of these ICE activities is to normalize the idea of the aggressive abuse of Democratic elected officials, not just politicians, but specifically to start trying to incept into the idea of the American people that this administration will just arrest Democrats who are not in agreement with them. Is that too far-fetched? Because that seems to be what the underlying plan here is.
Attorney General Pam Bondi has said it out loud. She said they're trying to, quote, liberate Democratic cities from their elected officials. I mean, that is just code for creeping authoritarianism. The federal government is going to come at Democrats, put out absurd statements about it right after I was arrested in a way that everyone could visibly see. I didn't lay a hand on a federal official. That didn't stop DHS from putting out a statement saying that they had detained me because I had assaulted federal officials. So yes, I mean, this is a form of authoritarian, I don't want to call it theater because it's very real. Right. They are projecting violence in order to scare immigrants and in order to erode the rule of law. I mean, I take it really seriously.
And speaking of a candidate speaking of an elected official who's had his own issues with the rule of law, I want to sort of share with you this quote from Mayor Eric Adams. Eric Adams showed little sympathy for Comptroller Lander after ICE arrested him. During a June 18th interview on the Reset talk show, Adams declined to join other Democrats in bashing ICE's actions against Lander and immigrants. You're running for mayor of New York City. Eric Adams is sitting mayor of New York City. What do you think should be the attitude of a mayor of New York City about ICE agents breaking into communities, arresting people off the street, separating families, leading whole communities to be afraid to go to work? Is the attitude that you're seeing from Eric Adams, is that reflective of the kind of person you think should be leading New York City?
I mean, Eric Adams has brought shame onto himself and onto New York City. We've got that Statue of Liberty out in the harbor. That's literally the symbol of our city. And to have him, collaborate with Donald Trump to accelerate deportation. Let's be clear. It's not just that he didn't show sympathy for me. He is on the side of the ICE agents and the administration that's looking to round people up. And no, New York City has sanctuary city laws that say we don't let ICE in our schools and our public hospitals and our homeless shelters. And then we look to protect all New Yorkers. 40% of New Yorkers are immigrants. 50% live in mixed status households, including 1 million children. Like, this is about protecting New Yorkers, whether you've been here since birth or since breakfast. And I'm running for mayor because we need a leader who will stand up for our immigrant neighbors, but also for the rule of law, not just as in Eric Adams' case for himself.
I believe what the statute says is give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, not just those who can escape ICE on a Friday night. Thank you, Brad Lander, for joining us on The Beat, and thank you for your bravery.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Up next, my breakdown of what comes next for anti-Trump mass protests tonight on The Beat.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
An iconic line from an even more iconic film. 50 years ago today, on June 20th, 1975, America had its first blockbuster film, Jaws. Directed by a young Steven Spielberg, Jaws transformed everything from how Hollywood marketed movies to how Americans discuss politics. Jaws spawned 3 different sequels, some good, some terrible, but for some reason, the citizens and politicians of Amity Island never seemed to learn their lesson about that shark. You see, the shark in Jaws has come to symbolize everything from taxes to crime to federal government overreach. And now at 50, Jaws still has a lot to tell us about how Americans should handle dangerous politics that are hiding just beneath the water. In the movie, Mayor Vaughn refuses to admit what's happening, despite multiple attacks in broad daylight on the citizens of the town. In fact, first he doesn't believe there's a shark, then he tries to downplay the shark, and eventually he hopes to ignore the shark for his own political and economic benefit. All the while, Jaws continues to snatch people up in broad daylight.
We never had that kind of trouble in these waters. Oh, what else could have done that to that girl? Vote for Bella?
Well, I think possibly, yes, a boating
That's not what you told me over the phone.
I was wrong. We'll have to amend our reports.
And you'll stand by
I'll
that?
stand by you.
Marty, a summer girl goes swimming. Swims out a little far. She tires. Fishing boat comes along.
It's happened before.
I don't think you appreciate the gut reaction people have to these things.
Harry, I appreciate it. I'm just reacting to what I was told.
Martin, it's all psychological. You yell barracuda, you're racist. Huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
So, who finally stops the shark? Who stands up to the force of nature that never seems to sleep, that seems driven by revenge and deep self-loathing? Well, it's not the politicians. They're too busy worrying about themselves and getting reelected. It's Hooper, the scientist, played by Richard Dreyfuss, and Brody, the cop, played by Roy Schneider, and Quint, the working-class military guy that's seen it all, played by Robert Shaw.
Smile, you son of a...
In other words, it's the unlikely trio of science, law, and the good old-fashioned working class, all on the back of a boat called the Orca. You know orcas, the black whales with a long history of fighting against sharks? Working together, that finally defeats Jaws. America under Trump is a lot like Amity Island. While politicians either comply with his authoritarian takeover or give speeches that amount to nothing, it's regular people who are stepping up. Scientists have stood up to RFK Jr.'s vaccine disinformation. Judges have blocked or delayed many of Trump's deportation orders. Just yesterday, the LAPD, by no means a paragon of human rights, blocked ICE from raiding a Los Angeles Dodgers game. And we saw 5 million Americans, including thousands of military veterans, make their voices heard in the form of the No Kings protest. Now, this doesn't mean that the threat is over. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, Trump will definitely try something else. And it will take even more people fighting and resisting to lead to any real lasting change. Or in the words of Chief Brody, we're going to need a bigger boat. But fortunately, whether it's Trump 2.0 or Jaws Revenge, the sequel is never as hard to stop as the original. Be right back with one more thing. European powers meeting with Iranian officials today in Geneva, as Trump says he's going to make a decision within 2 weeks on potential strikes against Iran. The talks today reportedly yielding little progress as Europe pushes Iran to curb its nuclear program. Our colleague Andrea Mitchell sat down today with Iran's foreign minister.
Can diplomacy produce a solution in 2 weeks?
Well, I think it's up to Americans, the United States, I mean, to show their determination for going for a negotiated solution, or they have something else in their mind and they want to attack Iran anyway. So they had perhaps this plan, and they just needed negotiations, perhaps, to cover it up. We don't know how we can trust them anymore. What they did was, in fact, a betrayal to diplomacy.
It's the 8th day of missile strikes between Iran and Israel, with 24 reported dead in Israel and over 600 in Iran. I think it's important to remember that these negotiations will be handled by the same Pete Hegseth who seems comfortable with sending troops into the United States cities. That does it for me tonight.